This is day 5 of the July-August 91 7-day retreat at Springwater. I've written down a few more questions, and also someone gave me a question that he wrote down. There are quite a number of questions we've never entered into during the previous days. Maybe we'll get to that sometime. Here are today's. When I heard you read the question, can a human being survive without at least one emotional attachment? Or, to say it clearly, doesn't a human being need at least one emotional attachment to survive? My mind immediately turned the question around. Can a human being survive if there is even one emotional attachment in one's life? Everyone tells me that I should have a goal and a purpose in life toward which I should apply myself, strive toward. Can one live without a goal and a purpose? It was not just one person who is concerned with this question. It seems such an inordinately exhausting effort to pay attention to everything. I find after a while I don't even want to pay attention to one more thing, like washing the dishes or brushing my teeth. You have had a lot of formal training. Doesn't one need some formal discipline training before one can do this work in a free and unregimented way? Our daughter, who is here, she's 8 years old, asked if she could come up and meditate. The answer we gave was, yes, she could. So if you see a little 8-year-old for a few minutes sitting in here, don't be surprised. Her mother told me that actually she didn't want to go swimming someplace else because, as she said, she didn't want to leave the retreat. She likes to go up there to the pond with her 3 other siblings. Are there some things one can do to bring about more attention? Certainly coming to an environment such as this quiet retreat place is very helpful in being increasingly aware and quiet. But what can one do in one's busy daily life to be aware, attentive? Listening to the pains of the busy, grasping, frustrated mind can be followed later by a spacious attending. Are there 2 parts of this work? The first, a more willful, focused attending. The second, a comprehensive listening out of not knowing. Which is a similar question in a way to, don't we first need some discipline, maybe require sittings, practice? You certainly have had it, the person said. And wasn't that sort of a prerequisite to coming here and sitting, listening, or whatever this work is, doing it more freely? Does one have to precede the other? Maybe since it's fresh in the mind right now, we will start with this one, but I will also come to this emotional attachment, because several people have asked about it. In retrospect, one may find in one's particular instance, and that of friends, that a formal, focused on a practice kind of sitting preceded coming here and at least trying or wanting to listen openly, or maybe really just listening openly without effort or will. Because open listening is incommensurate with effort and will. The two exclude each other. Effort and will brings focused attention plus resistance to it. That's something put out here. Please look at it yourself, whether willpower, effort is ever free from the resistance to it, or whether the two go hand in hand, one producing the other, resistance producing the thought, I need will to break through this resistance, which came in the wake of willing to do something, which is already coupled with something one has to will through. And this listening to the wind and the cicadas, the breeze and the air, the heart beating, the breath, just let's do it right now. Is there any effort involved? Just listening. Do I have to say I must listen now? I may say that, but then I can hear saying I must listen now, and what the body does to accompany such a command. But the birds, the song of the cicadas and the wind, the rustling trees is there, isn't it? To be heard freely. When the mind isn't in this contortion of I must, I should. The hum of the plane is the effort to hear it. It's there, isn't it? And if it isn't there, if there's the thought, I can't do it, I'm not as good as so-and-so or her or him, can that be heard? Can one be aware of that thought? One can't, can one? The thought, I'm no good or somebody else is better. We become aware of all kinds of things about ourselves. And hadn't made an effort to become aware of that. It just happened. That one became aware of greedy at the table, maybe only few blueberries or cherries left. One can notice something about oneself, thoughts, the body rushing. If one thinks one is late, one can become aware of rushing. All the things that people tell me or talk about is stuff one has become aware of. Without effort, it's just there in the mind. The mind, every once in a while, wakes up from its dreams and sleeps and fantasies and reveries. And in this moment of awareness, what is reflected or perceived is the memory reverberating of what was. And then, if there's not immediately the thought, oh my God, I wasn't attentive, why wasn't I should? If that thought doesn't come up, then the wind is also there. In its fullness of sound and touch and color. I say the sound and touch and color, because when the mind is open, the senses do not operate as 5 different senses, which we've learned in school. There are 5 different senses, and one is the hearing, and the hearing is with the ears, and what you hear is sounds. And so the child learns to think all of these things are separate, because the teaching is in fragments, in concepts, which are divisive. It's the very nature of concepts to delineate one thing from another as though these were 2 separate things. But one may wake up to the wonder of there being no delineation between hearing, seeing, and touching. That being one whole perception. Free from fragmentation through thought and definition. So back to the question, does formal training, which many of us went through for many years, being given a practice to follow the breath, to count the inhalation and then count the exhalation, or one or the other, or then concentrate on a koan or a mantram, a spot in the body, or a concept like loving kindness, or if one is from the Christian tradition, to contemplate the love of God or Jesus. Does this concentrated effort have to precede listening freely, openly, non-fragmentarily? I wouldn't make any such pronouncement, establish any such maxim or principle. Because if one establishes, then it is believed in, and we act and behave very much according to our beliefs, or our expectations of what should happen to us, according to what a revered book or teacher says. The mind is so powerful to deceive, to regiment, to control. Thought is, when I say mind, I mean thought, concept, conditioning. So even though one may have had formal training, one doesn't know how it would have been had one never had this formal training. In fact, there are more and more people coming here who have not had formal training of any kind. And sometimes have an easier time understanding what is talked about than if one has learned to concentrate and exclude and fight and will a certain state, to willfully bring about a certain state of freedom from thoughts through cutting them off, through a practice. When the mind is so trained and conditioned, it is so tethered, is almost afraid of looking freely at itself. When I started giving talks at a formal training center, some people understood and were into it, what was being said. Others said, I don't know what you're talking about. You're beginning to be too intellectual. Or you talk about unnecessary things, like fear or pain, or attachment. I mean, not just talking about going into it, looking at it, anger. All one needs is to concentrate on the practice and let everything else happen from that. And there may be experiences in the wake of concentrating very hard, a lot of willpower, actually, when an opening happens, it is that one has given up the whole thing. One doesn't get any place. The mind, like somebody said yesterday, is getting tired of the whole thing. And maybe with that, an opening happens. The tether breaks down. And yet it's built up very quickly if it has become a habit and a belief that this is what I need to do. That's why to pronounce any kind of thing that needs to be done, I find, is very dangerous, particularly if one is sitting in front of lots of people who are listening openly, wanting maybe to believe something, to have something to attach to. And this attaching to something prevents the freedom of not knowing what comes first, what comes later. Maybe there is no such succession, even though looking back in one's life there has been. But that doesn't prove anything. So, is there two parts of this work? The first, a more willful attending. The second, a comprehensive listening out of not knowing. If there is willful attending, willful focused attending, this work, as I see it, is to become aware of that. Become aware of anything that's going on. Like hating to be attentive one more moment. Listening to that. I'm sick and tired of it, to listen to it, not to say, come on, or add command upon command. But to stop and listen to all the commands and how the body responds either obediently or rebelliously or in confusion. This work is not one thing, one way. It's so often misunderstood as though there's this and then there are many other ways, and don't ever pretend that this is the only way, people say to me. But it's not a way. It's just listening to what's there, becoming aware of what's there. This instant, in the mind and body and in the trees and sky and on the water. It's not a method. It's just waking up. How one knows not, because it does happen on its own. The person who said, I get so tired of attending, I don't want to do one more attending in washing my dishes. She became aware of something in the mind. Only can one leave alone this precious instant of awareness? We're trained to immediately react, to comment, to interpret, to bring the mind back. This is a very beloved expression. Got to bring the mind back. There's no going back. There's only now. Back is memory, or an aching back, which is here right now. And one could say, well, it's just a manner of speaking, but can one observe gently, interestedly, how these manners of speaking affect us? Because there's me having to haul something from here to there, the mind. It's picture, somebody just sent me along a nicely made little booklet of the 10 ox herding pictures. People who've been in Zen training or have been interested in reading Zen things may be familiar with it. All the steps of looking for the ox, seeing his traces, and then finding him, and then hauling him with a rope, because the ox doesn't want to come. Of course he doesn't. Why should it be roped and trained? I don't want to make an addition here of commenting on the ox herding picture. So we are affected by the way we put things to ourselves and to each other. And if the mind is not open, it is full of will or resistance. That's a fact. I wouldn't say this is a stepping stone, but it's a fact. And how can we become aware of that? And one thing seems to work is to talk a lot about it, to question it, to look at it, to discuss it, dialogue about it, meet in a group with a friend. Or if there's no one who's interested, to look at it alone, or find some books of someone who has done all this and has put it down in clear ways. How thought and feeling and emotion and concept operates. One can dialogue with a book, with an author who is not tethered to anything, but freely looking, freely discovering, and freely expressing, without saying, "Follow me." So, talking about this, people tell it to me all the time, that's why it becomes clearer and clearer, has some strange connection with suddenly becoming aware of something that one has never noticed before. And that's not necessarily restricted to people who do this work. Often an argument comes up, or discussion, whether we disparage therapy here, or whether therapy is not also helpful in becoming aware of things. Well, let's try it out if it is helpful to see something. People tell me that they've seen a lot about themselves in therapy, so why disparage it? To get out of this, the doldrums of habit, blind habit, which one takes for granted to be right or necessary, inevitable, human nature, my personality, to begin to feel the freedom to question it is already a marvelous change. And if in whatever way something is seen that is so, that is true, that is not distorted through wanting or fearing or image, what does it matter what the context is, or with whom one is as something is discovered, or as one may be alone? Remember one time, sometimes people tell me, be a little personal, say something from your own life, so you are less image and more person. We had just adopted a little baby, a little boy, and we had waited for him for a long time, but there was no babies available for adoption for 2 years. And then suddenly, my doctor called me up and he said, within 24 hours, there's going to be a baby delivered. Do you want him? It was a week before Christmas. And my heart was really pounding. I called up Kyle at school, and he said, yes, call him right back. If he hadn't said that, I don't know whether I would have had the heart to say yes. But he was so enthusiastic, so positive. So we called up the doctor, and he said, all right, 6 days after the baby has been delivered, you can pick him up. That was the rule at the time. That for 6 days, that baby was not to see either his mother nor the adopting parents, which still makes me shudder when I think about it. The care that is given now to put the baby immediately on the belly. Of course, there were nurses there, and the little baby ward. I never saw it. We couldn't even go to the hospital. We picked up the baby with a basket, which still is my laundry basket, at the doctor's. He had this little wrapped up little thing with some provisions and a warm bottle. Baby was awake, he was looking. And all the way home, and we stopped at some friends who had 3 children because I didn't know how to even unwrap this baby. She said, well, let's look at this baby. And she unwrapped it. And there he was, long hair. Looked like a beetle. And he was awake. Everybody looked at him, held him. And then we had to drive home some more 20 minutes. It was an hour or more. He was still awake, still looking. And then when we got home, he began to cry because it was time for feeding, and we didn't even quite know how to heat a bottle. So we were quite clumsy and very cerebral. We had read Dr. Spock over and over, which today is not considered the best literature to read. But I got a lot of help, for better or worse. So then one of the things, of course, is to pat the baby on the back so he burps. And this baby did not burp. Didn't burp. So it was maybe a week later or 2 weeks later, 3 weeks, I don't know how old he was. I was sitting in his room, holding him dutifully and patting him on the back, trying to get out a burp, which didn't happen. And then suddenly something changed. And there was the freedom or the realization that there was no division here. I didn't have to do anything. I can't explain it. It was just not this labor to do something to get a result. And here's the baby and here's me. It wasn't. It was a complete change for a moment or a few moments, accompanied by an intense and never before experienced joy, happiness, lightness. I couldn't wait for Kyle to come home, but I couldn't explain to him what had happened. And he couldn't get it either. I mean, he was glad to see me happy and all. Later I forgot about that. It receded again, but maybe something didn't change back to put it into those words. So now why did I bring this up? Oh, things happen on their own. Somebody could say, well, you're rhythmically patting on the back, and that was the practice. And the practice led to, well, this is nonsense. I don't know how it happened. And it happens to people in all walks of life. They're bus drivers, truck drivers, taxi drivers. I mention these 3 because 3 such people have talked about it. But there are other people. We think we're so all-powerful, or we have to become all-powerful, but things were here intelligently operating billions of years before we appeared, with this thought mechanism, which is only a small part of the brain operating, so brain scientists tell us. The largest part of the brain is not even used by us, or is not even used because there's no user, it uses itself. And that small part that's operating is busy with all the petty stuff. I don't mean the part of the brain that takes care of the organism functioning intelligently. That is an awesome, awesome affair. If one reads newer books about how the immune system or the communication system happens in the body, one is totally awestruck. about the intelligence that we haven't been even aware of 15 years ago that is going on in this body here, uncontrolled by the cerebral cortex that thinks it is an entity and a me, and controls and schemes and fears and attaches. Through imagery. Shall we get to this other part? There was really a sequence of 3 questions. One person saying, I'm afraid I'm getting emotionally attached to you. Another person saying, what is this emotional attachment? And the same person saying, can we survive as human beings without at least being attached to one person? And then someone saying, can we survive as a free human being when we attach to even one person? What needs to be clarified so we're all looking at the same thing is what, and we won't be able to get that done today. What am I? Who and what is the attacher? The one that needs to attach. What is attachment? Emotional attachment. And what is the one that feels the need of it? When we questioned it, because it came up in a group, in questioning the person who had asked, can one survive without even one emotional attachment, and questioning, well, what do you mean by emotional attachment? What came out was, well, being able to trust a person, to really be unconditionally accepted by that person, accepted as one is, loved, cared for, which I think most often happens in our life, as with a new baby, as a mother and new baby. Accepting the baby as it is, caring for the baby, loving it, warming it, cuddling it. The baby trusting that the mother will be there, although the mother will not always be there. It's impossible. But maybe in the early stages as much as possible. But in going from that human scene to the animal scene of mother animals taking care of baby animals, and sometimes the father is involved too. Most often the mother. I can never tire of watching that, either on movies or in nature, how a mother swan or duck takes care of her little ones, letting them do from the beginning, some on their own, and yet when they need to come close, to not swim away out to the job or someplace, to be there. The apes is wonderful to observe, in monkeys, how they're there. They have all the time in the world, these huge mothers. They don't have to go to work to earn a second salary. They're there. And yet not, they let the little one climb around, sometimes maybe grabbing it when it may be perceived to be too dangerous, but most of the time the little one comes back on its own and goes further and further away and then comes back sort of to touch base. and eventually it's on its own, and it seems as though the tie is forgotten. It doesn't persist. A new baby is there. Although I don't know whether some of you saw this most moving footage, I think it was Goodall taking this of a mother chimp whose son had not broken the tie. He was big now and he was still riding on her back. She was practically breaking under the weight. She was already gray. She had, I don't know how many litters since. And she gave birth to a little baby chimp. And one day that baby chimp was found killed. The one who made the movie did not know whether the big son had done that, but it could have been. And the son climbed on the back of the mother again, even heavier now. And she died after 2 weeks. And a few weeks or days later, he also died. So that was a case, the only one I've ever seen recorded, of a tie not broken naturally at the right time, and both of them perished. The mother was old enough to have perished, but maybe she would have continued living because there was this little one that was killed. So, why is it that in our human life, ties become so sticky, so hard and fast? So, well, we can all look how they become and what they do. Because with this tie that is not broken, or that is with the tie, with the emotional tie, it may not be to the mother, it may be to the lover, to the husband, wife, comes possessiveness, exclusive rights to this person, jealousy, when one feels the exclusive rights have been broken. Can be murderous jealousy, just like with that son chimp, although no one knows for sure whether it was him who killed the sister. Although there was plenty of footage how mean he was to her. Cruel. So there's no denying of the beauty and need at certain times for, or at all times, for caring for each other, loving each other, affection, tenderness. And also, when little ones are there, children, for husband and wife to stay together if possible. Sometimes it doesn't seem to be possible. Maybe it's better to part ways. I'm not so sure about all this. But why this holding on to anything or on anyone for dear life? Who is the holder honor? Now we have to look at that. What is it about us that we need to grasp and cling to something or someone else? Where the clinging itself often destroys the beauty of the relationship. Because nobody really wants to be clung to. Maybe for a while, but it's something one wants to shake. Naturally, being clung to. What is it in us? And what is it we're seeking through this emotional attachment? Which, doesn't it always go with at best wanting sole possession of that person, and the feelings when that cannot be fulfilled. Envy, jealousy, hatred. Hurt. Dismal hurt. When the person shows interest in someone else. What is it in us that we need this attaching? To make sure I've got this forever. One person once on a documentary on the drug Valium, where it was explored whether this was really not addictive as had been thought, and it was found it is addictive. And there was this one woman who took, I don't know how much, 60 or 100 milligrams a day, a tremendous amount. And she was holding the little bottle, shaking it in her hand and smiling brimly, and she said, I don't need to worry, I have my Valium. I don't need to worry about anything anymore. Anything that may make me feel upset or insecure, I can get over it by taking this. Because it was also shown in the movie what happened to her. Whatever addiction brings of its drugs or alcohol. So is emotional attachment an addiction that the body becomes addicted to? It's not really the person, it's the idea of the person being there for one all the time. The image of my beloved, my possession, my treasure, my. Addicted to that imagery. Bringing up the thought of it, whether it's the Valium or the bottle or the person, when there is stress and needing to hold on to this person. And isn't with the moment we enter into this addictive attachment, isn't sorrow in the wake? Sadness, fear, the whole human sorrow, isn't that right there with the attachment? Fear of losing, fear of abandonment, which brings back earlier pains of abandonment stored in the brain. And body, not just the brain. We talked about this. The brain is just the coordinator of all of the storage of information, past experiences. Please, I'm not saying detach or don't be attached or it's bad. We're looking at it. And I may not have said the whole thing. It's impossible to say the whole thing ever. The whole thing can be experienced in oneself. The whole thing not just being the attachment, but where it comes from. This deep-seated feeling of insufficiency, which has never melted away or atrophied because it was never given a chance to be seen, to be questioned, and also never a chance of standing on one's own 2 feet, inquiring and maybe finding love for oneself. By finding love for oneself, I don't mean for me, but coming upon love which does not depend on anyone or anything, which is there in great abundance, when the mind is not tethered or afraid of losing, afraid of dying or afraid of losing the beloved. In that kind of mode, the mind cannot come upon this free-flowing love. Which is there unbound and unconditioned. When the narrow enclosure of insufficiency and with its attachments and fears is quiet, is in abeyance, bypassed altogether by an energy of awareness that is now, not of the past, but now. The recordings of the past can be seen in that awareness, but they don't tie or bind through longing, craving, or fearing. So, isn't the supreme challenge for a human being, such as you and me, whether there can be caring and love between each other and among each other, without needing to tie or bind anyone? And living in the intelligence of that. Intelligence also meaning when there are children, maybe we need to stay together as a family. But do we see that? And is there the love to do it? Because the tie, even though it's recorded in some kind of a justice of peace or religious book, doesn't seem to do the trick to keep us together. There has to be something else operating, doesn't it? To see intelligently and lovingly what is needed for little children. I've gone through 2 divorces, one of our children right now, our son and his wife and children, and one of my brother and his wife and children. And in both cases being in close contact with the children, in both cases the children wanted mom and dad to be together. No matter how, and very often of course parents say it's hell for the kids, the way we scream at each other. But those children didn't refer to that. Maybe they were also imbued with images of a happy family, I don't know. But my nephew years ago said, could the judge tell them to get back together? He was already in high school. And I'm not passing judgment on people divorcing. Sometimes it may be the only thing in which each partner can maintain their sanity, or I don't know. Many women have told me it was the right thing to have done to be on their own. Men have told me that too. But what I was saying was not to just go with our habitual mode of thinking, well, if I don't have the bond, then everything will break apart. We don't stick together because of promises. I think there's abundant proof for that. Do we stay together because we realize that we're needed in a certain enterprise of raising a family or doing a job? And the love of doing it, the intelligence of doing it the way for the time being seems to be what is needed. One will remain open so one doesn't delude oneself. To look inwardly to, is it just what I want, to feel not guilty or at ease or not feel pain? To question in this wise, to unearth all of our holdings, habits, feelings about things that are often so obscured or so distorted. So the question, the last in this series, can a human being survive with emotional attachment? What is the human being one is referring to? A tied human being lives and dies with ties. Or maybe lives with ties and maybe in dying the ties dissolve. That happens too, I'm sure. And so I think so significant as one is with someone dying, not to keep that tie up. Try to bind the person, don't go, stay for me or so. Must be very hard for a person who is in this process of dying to feel the pull and tug from the family. And if it's possible for a tie to loosen and dissolve in death, can it happen in life? So that a genuine love can come into being and blossom, which is intelligent at the same time, not made up out of principles and obligations and ideas and feelings of insufficiency and neediness. Please, I'm not saying don't be needy or don't be insufficient. I'm not saying that. Let's look at it, be in touch with it, and see all that comes out of it, and learn about it freely, without knowing what to do about it. Seeing and learning about it intelligently has its own ways, which are beyond the scheming brain. Or the fearing brain, fearing thought, let's say. Scheming, fearing thought. We will end here for today.